Iran this year became one of the newest members of the emerging market country grouping BRICS. Though pressed by US sanctions, Iran's economy has been resilient, seeing the 9 months to December 2023 showing a GDP growth of around 6.7%, and this has exceeded World Bank forecasts of 4%. Despite this, though, citizens are facing some challenges, including a weakening currency and high inflation. So the question is, will BRICS membership help alleviate some of these issues? I spoke to political analyst and academic Professor Seyed Marandi. Professor Marandi, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the channel.
Thank you very much for having me.
Iran is one of the newest members of the BRICS grouping. Why has Iran joined BRICS?
Well, Iran has joined over the last 3 years 2 major organizations. One is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a security organization for the most part, which is comprised of the major powers in Asia. And it has also joined BRICS, and which so far is focused more on economics, it would seem, at this stage. And the reason is that Iran is looking for strengthening its relationship with countries of the global south and to decrease dependence on Western regimes, and in particular, in order to weaken the hold of the United States over different institutions, but in particular, financial institutions, partially because of the dollar.
So what do you think Iran can bring to the BRICS grouping? What can it contribute?
Well, Iran has, I think, the world's 4th largest oil reserves and the 2nd largest natural gas reserves after Russia. It's also very rich in minerals, and it borders 15 different countries. It is developing a major north-south corridor that links Russia and Central Asia to the Persian Gulf, and it is also a part of the Chinese initiative, the Belt and Road, where it also links China to the Persian Gulf and to West Asia. So it is a crossroads for trade and business, and it is very rich, and it also has a large population, and as we all know, it is very influential across West Asia. It has allies from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. So I think it can add a great deal to BRICS.
I know that Iran is going through quite a tough time in terms of economics. You have inflation, you have a currency that's under pressure. Do you think belonging to a grouping such as BRICS can help with some of the challenges at home?
Yes, definitely. I think that since many countries that are members of BRICS are being sanctioned by the United States, in particular Iran and Russia, but also increasingly China, and since other countries that are both member states or aspiring member states are fearful of US pressure, there is a strong incentive to develop financial institutions that are independent of the West and independent of the US dollar. Iran, as you pointed out, is facing difficulties because of the sanctions, and therefore, if these mechanisms can be developed, Iran will no longer feel those pressures. Right now, the Iranian economy is growing at somewhere between 6 and 7%, but that's because the sanctions regime is weakening. But over the past few years, there was a period of time actually where Iran had virtually no growth for 4 or 5 years during the period when US sanctions had the strongest effect.
People talk about geopolitics, and you spoke about countering the West. And I wonder, is this about what the grouping can do together economically, or is it a grouping to fight the US and other enemies, inverted commas?
Well, the West has treated the rest of the world very poorly, and often it has committed horrific crimes, such as what we're seeing today in Gaza, the genocide, which is really unprecedented in human history in the sense that we are watching it literally live as it takes place. But of course, we've seen what the United States and the West has done to Iran, to South Africa, across Latin America, Asia, Africa for centuries. But the purpose, in my opinion, of strengthening BRICS or other organizations, regional organizations, is not because the global South wants war with the West or because it wants to remain hostile with the West. It is basically to protect themselves from Western aggression, from harm that comes from the West as a result of their very aggressive policies. So if the West is able to treat the rest of the world with dignity and respect someday in the future, then I think they could be a part of BRICS as well, or different organizations that belong to the global South could be more inclusive to bring them in as well. But at the moment, with what we're seeing across the globe and how the West is behaving, the rest of the world needs to protect themselves.
So, perhaps as we start to wrap up this conversation, the economics make sense, and it's quite clear that the BRICS grouping going forward is probably going to eclipse the Western grouping, G7, etc. The geopolitics will always be a challenge, I guess. And I wonder, some of the developing nations, we saw Argentina not take up its invitation for BRICS. And I wonder what that means, because we started talking about us versus them kind of scenario playing out. Might BRICS have a challenge going forward as some people feel pressure from groupings like the G7, the US, etc., which it seems has happened to Argentina?
Yes, that will definitely happen, and the West will do its best to undermine BRICS and all other non-Western organizations. But I think it's becoming increasingly clear that the West is on the decline. Its relative decline is something that we're witnessing and which is happening much faster today than it was a few years ago. And on the other hand, non-Western countries are on the rise. It doesn't mean that they're without their own problems. Iran, though, is on the rise. And so is China and Russia and South Africa and other non-Western countries. So this tilt in the balance of power is irreversible as far as I can see. And therefore, it is going to be increasingly difficult for the West to undermine the global South or major powers in the global South uh, in a way in which they were capable of doing years ago. So I think that while we're going to see instances like Argentina repeat itself or repeat themselves in the future, I think the general trend is going to be the weakening of the West and the rise of the global South, and thus institutions or organizations like BRICS, they will be the future.
All right, and very finally, what do you think Iran's flagship policy is going to be that it wants to nurture within the BRICS grouping? What is it that Iran would love to see the BRICS grouping do and will try and influence in that direction?
I think Iran wants to see a major change in the way in which economic development takes place. And it wants to see a much more just global order. And therefore, countries across the world in particular African countries, which have for centuries have experienced Western aggression, Western hegemony, and even now they're being plundered by Western powers. Countries in Africa, countries in Latin America, countries in Asia, they can be able to develop in a way in which the citizens of these countries can live in dignity, and they no longer feel the need to leave their homeland for some other place to work for someone else. And the West in future would be a part of the global community like any other part of the global community. It would have its equal say, but not like in the past, where it dictated terms and also stole the resources and plundered the resources of countries across the global south. I think the West has already lost much of its leverage, and really the only two things that are left is the media, and the second is the Western hold over global financial institutions and the US control through the dollar. So BRICS can do a great deal to take away one of the last two weapons of the West, and thus assisting countries across the global south to build a better future for themselves and for their neighbors and for their region.
Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, thank you so much indeed for joining us on the BRICS Africa channel. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me.